useful to see how they compare to other parts of the world so that we could share some of these experiences. And we're very pleased to have, as moderating this panel, Mike Jones, who is from Stockholm. He is associated with the Resilience Institute, and he will be acting as the moderator. So Mike, why don't you come and introduce yourself?
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the workshop. I have two roles. The first part of it is to take you through some of the concepts of resilience as they might be applied to the reduction of the disasters, the risk of disasters associated with oil spills. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of that, and then I'm going to be your moderator. So once I've done my bit, everything else is up to you guys. I know virtually nothing about the oil industry. My background is in protected area management, community-based natural resource management, mostly in Eastern and Southern Africa, but some of it in the United States. But for the last 4 years, I've been based at the Stockholm Resilience Center, working as part of this program with the Resilience Alliance, taking the science of resilience out to practitioners and policymakers, hoping to make it relevant to them in practical ways so that they can apply it in the management and the design of policy for environmental management problems. So, resilience is used in a whole welter of different ways by different people for different purposes. And what I want to do is just focus you on this bit here, the operational definition of resilience of what, which is the defined system, to what, the defined disturbance. The minute you restrict it to that, you're in the position to start building a model of change within the system that you're trying to manage. The other thing that I wanted to point out to you just quickly is that the emergency planning generally, so it's all to do with reducing the risk of disaster, emphasizes the bounce back attributes of resilience, and that's engineering resilience, to the exclusion of the bounce forward attributes, which are part of ecological resilience. Ecological systems are living systems, they evolve and change all the time. So the approach that you need to build ecological resilience is very different from that used in engineering. And if you only focus on engineering resilience, then you're actually limiting your management options for managing the ecosystem. So just quickly, the two different kinds of resilience. Engineering resilience is based on the assumption that systems are known and behave predictably. Engineers design systems that are resilient in the sense that they are fail-safe under a wide range of operating conditions. Ecological resilience, on the other hand, is based on the assumption that systems are potentially knowable but are unpredictable because they have a life of their own, that you don't know what they're going to do next. So ecological systems are resilient in the sense that they are safe to fail under a wide range of environmental conditions. So in engineering systems, collapse may lead to improved design, and that's really what we're going to be talking about in this workshop today. Not only improved design with regard to the operations of the oil industry, but also with regard to improved design in the way the larger environment within which the oil industry operates can be managed by the different actors that have various roles in the system. Okay? Okay. In ecological systems, collapse is essential for maintaining resilience and for evolution. Now, this is one of the biggest problems that we have in the world today. We've tried to hold ecological systems in fixed states, and as a consequence of that, we've made them lose or caused them to lose their resilience, made them very vulnerable, brought them to the point where they're quite fragile to shocks and disturbances, and it's actually not good news. We have to change the way we manage ecosystems. This is a very simple diagram that enables you to understand the different kinds of order and the different kinds of knowledge related to those states of order. Engineering resilience belongs down here in this bottom left-hand quadrant. It's all about simple systems that are known. This is where best practice lies. So this is dealing with the physics and the chemistry and the inert things. It's what's led to the development of so much of the technology that has led to so much human development over the years, particularly the last couple of 100 years. At the opposite end of the spectrum, we have the domain of complex adaptive systems. These are essentially unknowable. They're managed by pattern managers, that means intuitive managers. This is the realm in which there are no objectively definable solutions to the problem. Resilience assessment and the resilience modeling fits in here between these two domains. And the purpose of resilience assessment and the development of resilience models is to enable you to develop something which is sufficiently tractable for management to work with. That system is still going to be changed, so you will develop a model of change which you then use for adaptive management to monitor the impacts of the management steps that you take, and also perhaps to do some very deliberate experiments to push the system beyond its limits to see how it behaves, or beyond where you think its limits may be, so that you learn more about the way the system works, more about its dynamics. So that's where ecological resilience belongs. And then of course down here we have this rather unpleasant place, which is where we go when everything falls apart. Fortunately, these kinds of situations are relatively short-lived. If you've got strong leadership, people who can reorganize a system and get it up and running, and if you're prepared, and that's what a lot of disaster risk reduction is about. It's about being prepared to deal with the chaos. If you're well prepared, it's not a situation you need to stay in for very long. Okay, so just to summarize these two different kinds of resilience, very different ways of understanding systems, but together they lead to a broader understanding of the whole, and they can be applied to what we call adaptive, social, ecological, engineered systems, which is exactly what we're talking about here with regard to the oil industry and the greater environment within which it works. So just quickly, these are the core models of ecological resilience: change within systems, the adaptive cycle, potential for change, all the capital, social capital, ecological capital, financial capital, and so on, and connectedness here. That's all about the internal regulation of the system. And together, those things determine the resilience of the system. A couple of points about this model. Up here, you have what are called rigidity traps. These are points at which a system can get stuck. When a system needs to change but can't for some reason, it's caught in a rigidity trap. At the bottom end here, we have a thing known as a poverty trap. So that's a system that's collapsed into chaos but is not able to reorganize for some reason. Then the parts of the system tend to dissipate and become reabsorbed within other systems. Interactions between systems at multiple levels of scale. One of the things that managers frequently overlook is the fact that the system that they're really interested in managing, we call that the focal system in the middle here, is influenced by smaller subsystems within it, and also by the larger systems within it operate. And there are often interactions here that managers don't understand or don't know about, but can catch them unawares. But all this boils down to this model of alternate stable states and how systems can flip from one to another. So the real focus of it is this hump here between these two different states. The black ball is the system, the basin is the state within which it occurs. What we're concerned about is managing this hump and determining whether we want the system to stay in one stable state or in another. If an alternative stable state is undesirable, or the state that you're in is undesirable, then you manage this threshold to move the system around in ways that are more amenable to human well-being. This shows the same kind of thinking. This is the ball, these are the basins, these are the three levels of scale. And from a disaster risk reduction perspective, it's this here. this precarious value, this tells you
1 minute.
right. Good. This is what you can model. This is what helps you determine risk. The output of this is you've got two strategic choices. One is to maintain the system within its current state and enhance its bounce back, and the other is to deliberately engineer transformation by taking the system across a threshold into a new state. Right. I think given the time limit, I'll cut it off there. But there are some important caveats with this. It is not a blueprint. It is not a panacea. It is not a silver bullet. It's just an approach for managing complex adaptive systems. Thank you. Okay, the next panelist, you got the list?
Where? Oh, I'm sorry, Wes.
Wes. How do we get this thing off? End of the show. There you go.
Some
Yep.
questions? You want to take some questions for yours first?
Oh, yeah, are there any questions? Sorry. Any questions on that presentation? It's an awful lot to absorb in one go. Yes?
Hi, Mike.
I can.
One of the, I would say, problems I have with this resilience theory, because there are others as
Yes.
well, right? Is that it's acceptable in an ecosystem for a system to collapse and then renew itself. However, I have a hard time taking that as a parallel into human systems where ethically it's not acceptable that a society collapses. We try to do our best to avoid that it collapses. Even though if it does collapse, the outcome might be better. So I see some ethical issues with, I'm not saying that you were trying to transcribe the ecological model into human models, but if we were to, I do see some ethical issues in terms of the parallel with that model for human systems.
An ethical issue.
Well, in terms of, it's acceptable for an ecosystem to collapse and renew, but I see some ethical issues with saying that it's okay. You didn't actually say that, but if we were to transcribe this into human systems.
Well, I think I understand what you're getting at. Unfortunately, with the best will and the best of intentions in the world, human societies collapse. Our entire history shows how they have collapsed and reorganized and re-emerged. So, and one of the reasons that that's happened is because those societies have not been aware of the impacts that they were having on the environment and how their activities have actually eroded the resilience of the system upon which they were dependent. So that's one of the reasons why we use these ecological models and apply them to a social and ecological system, because the social side and the ecological side are interdependent and they interact with each other in complex ways. The social scientists generally do have some issues with these ecological models of resilience, but they haven't come up with anything better yet, in spite of being asked to do so. Their issues mainly revolve around questions of human agency, which is the power to change things. Humans are incredibly clever creatures. They have enormous amounts of power. They can bring about changes that may not be imagined today. And there's lots of evidence of that in the way technology has evolved. So humans have power, humans have agency. They also have an enormous fund of knowledge to draw on. And for me, the real trick about resilience is not worrying so much about the bounce back, unless you're in a really nice place and you want to keep it that way. It's thinking about transformational change and thinking about innovation and technology and human ingenuity, the way we can actually change our behavior, our mental models to transform society, transform the way we interact with the environment. Another one.
No, let's go to the next presentation.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here. I actually am a stand-in. My director at the Heart Research Institute, Larry McKinney, been planning for months since last spring to be here, and a medical issue came up where his doctor told him he couldn't fly. And so as of early last week, I shifted my schedule and I'm here to stand in for him. Both of us have a background of working in marine ecology and biology in the Gulf of Mexico, but also on the side dealing with oil spills. Both of us for about 35 to 40 years, so we have some parallel issues of the past. The Heart Research Institute is a new institute studying the Gulf of Mexico, and we try to look at it at an ecological and economic way so that it can be sustainable in the future. And so that'll be part of my presentation to you, is about how the oil spill affected both of these areas. For a quick geographic lesson, of course, this is the Gulf of Mexico. The United States is on the north side, Mexico on the south, and then Cuba here. So there's 3 countries that I'll be mentioning and dealing with as we go through the presentation. I'm a coral reef ecologist working in Mexico for 40 years, and then a coastal ecologist in Texas. Most recently, I've done a lot of biodiversity work connected to my almost 50 years of molluscan ecology and molluscan biodiversity work. So I'll use some of that as we go through also. First, to note that the Gulf of Mexico is one of the most productive and biodiverse places on Earth. It's considered a large marine ecosystem, one of 64 by NOAA around the world. We recently inventoried all the biodiversity of the Gulf of Mexico, totaling a little over 15,400 species. Those are all now inventoried and published in a book and in an online database. If anybody's interested in that, you can see some of the high numbers here of these very important habitats and how they relate to the rest of the United States. But interestingly, the Gulf of Mexico is considered by some to be the gas station, if you want to consider that as a metaphor. Look at the oil and gas pipelines that extend from the Louisiana, Texas area here to the rest of the country. It's pretty amazing. Texas and Louisiana developed this kind of oil culture right at the beginning of last century, when the Spindletop gusher actually blew out in East Texas, and that was the very first move into the oil industry in 1901. The first offshore oil platform was in Louisiana in 1937. Then over the next many decades, we continued to move across the continental shelf into deeper and deeper waters. Those, the map that you see in the upper left up there, those are the platforms scattered across the continental shelf and down the continental slope of the northwestern Gulf of Mexico, primarily off Texas and Louisiana. There were at one time a total number of 7,500 of these out there. Today there's about 3,400. They're coming out at a pace of about 200 or so a year. The large platform that you see on the right, the new floating kind, they'll drill as many as 25 to 30 wells off of one single platform. But it's also considered, the Gulf of Mexico, as the nation's fish market because of its high productivity. Look at the high numbers of shrimp and oysters in the commercial side of fishery, but also in the recreational side of the fishery. It's huge. The economy and the ecology part of it. The Deepwater Horizon blowout differs from all previous oil spills in 2 ways. One is because of its depth, and the other because of the application of dispersants at depth. The one on the left shows you kind of the traditional model of an oil spill that would blow out on the bottom, the heavy oil coming to the surface, floating on the surface, and then moving towards the land. The one on the right is the newly developing model presented by Peterson et al. As people are starting to really analyze what happened in the 2010 spill. To refresh your memory, that was April of 2010 when it blew out, and it blew for 87 days before it was capped. But in the one on the right, you see kind of the different components here. Rather than the oil just coming to the surface and possibly going into shore, in this case, when it came to the surface, it was already dispersed by the dispersants. And so probably not as much of it came into shore, but when it did come into shore, it was dispersed. And so the weathering aspect was allowed to proceed faster. That part was good. But what's happening in the deep water area is the area of concern of most people, because we never had to deal with something like this before. Normally the oil would just come to the surface, but with the dispersant, it made some of the oil and methane neutrally buoyant, so it remained in the mid part of the water column. And then some of it then settled to the bottom. Typically, oil doesn't go to the bottom unless it attaches to some kind of particle. That could be plankton in the water column. It could be sediment from the drilling muds that were used as a part of the capping process, or it could be the sediment coming out from the Mississippi River. The oil can bind to the sediments and then go to the bottom. And in fact, that apparently is what happened, and that's what this little cartoon depicts for you there on the right. So there were two really strong lessons that we learned from this blowout. One is that the Gulf is very resilient, but it does have its limits, and I'll show you some of this. And then also, the economic and environmental health of the Gulf are both very strongly linked. The picture on the bottom left shows the exclusive economic zone. This lower line across here is the U.S. exclusive economic zone, and then the red line here are the fishery closures that took place. They were added and increased over a period of about 3 to 4 months and then decreased in size, but it completely shut down the fisheries in those areas, so you can imagine the economic impact that it had. Then on the right-hand side, you see a picture that was a moratorium on drilling in the Gulf of Mexico.